Deadlines are often presented to us as immovable structures, a ticking clock that demands submission. In reality, they are more often a tool than a truth, especially in the arena of high-stakes trade negotiations. Deadlines create the illusion of urgency, compressing complex decisions into narrow time frames that favor the party already holding more leverage. In the case of the recent trade talks, India understood this psychological play. The deadline was not a law of nature, it was a human construct designed to force a decision before all the implications could be fully considered. And India chose not to play that game. When you agree to a deal under the weight of an artificial clock, you surrender not only your terms but also your strategic posture. You communicate, perhaps unintentionally, that you can be pressured into action. That perception, once cemented, becomes part of your negotiation DNA in the eyes of the world. India recognized that agreeing to an imperfect deal today for the sake of meeting the moment could create a dangerous precedent for tomorrow. And so, it reframed the situation. The true cost of rushing was far greater than the discomfort of waiting. Psychologically, this decision is profound. Humans are wired to fear running out of time. Our anxiety spikes as the seconds tick away, leading us to choose relief over reason. But the discipline to resist this urge, to extend the conversation, to keep the pen off the dotted line, is what separates reactive decision-making from strategic statecraft. By resisting the countdown, India projected not hesitation, but control. It was a statement that no external clock would dictate the pace of its decisions, especially when national interest was at stake. This is where philosophy meets policy. Time, as the ancients knew, is not just a measure of moments but a medium of power. He who controls the tempo controls the terms. If you allow another to set your pace, you are already following their lead. By refusing to be herded toward a premature agreement, India subtly but powerfully shifted the balance of the talks. It turned a one-sided race against the clock into a more level field, where the quality of the agreement mattered more than the date it was signed. And there is a lesson here not just for nations, but for individuals. Deadlines will always appear in our personal and professional lives, in contracts, in opportunities, in decisions that seem to expire before we are ready. The instinct is to rush toward closure, to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty. But in that space between now and too late, lies the potential for clarity, for better terms, for outcomes that respect your principles. India's stand reminds us that the real deadline is not the one they give you, it's the one you set for yourself. Everything else is negotiation. And if you can hold your ground against the artificial urgency of others, you keep hold of something far more valuable than a signature. You keep hold of your sovereignty. When you strip away the layers of jargon, the tables filled with numbers, and the polite language of diplomacy, every trade negotiation comes down to one central question: who gets to decide the terms of your future? That is the essence of sovereignty. It's not just about flags and borders, it's about the right to determine the economic pathways your nation will take, free from the dictates of outside powers. In these recent talks, India's firmness was not merely about tariffs or market access. It was about drawing a clear line. Our sovereignty is not up for negotiation. In international trade, concessions are often disguised as cooperation. The language is smooth: mutual benefit, shared growth, strategic partnership, but behind those phrases can lurk commitments that limit your freedom to act tomorrow. It is one thing to agree on terms that truly serve both sides. It is another to accept clauses that quietly hand over control of key sectors, policies, or resources, binding you in ways that may only become clear years later. India understood that every percentage point of a tariff cut, every regulatory alignment, every promise to open a market further was not just an economic move, but a political one. A shift in who holds the pen when writing the nation's story. There is a psychological depth to this stance. Sovereignty is like trust. Once given away casually, it is almost impossible to recover in full. The temptation in high-pressure negotiations is to view sovereignty in small, manageable slices. Just this one concession, just this one exception. But those slices add up. And the moment you normalize the idea that an external actor can set the boundaries of your economic decisions, you've surrendered more than a policy, you've surrendered a principle. History offers enough warnings. Many nations have signed away elements of their decision-making power in pursuit of short-term gains, only to find themselves constrained later when their circumstances changed. What looks like a harmless clause today can become a chain tomorrow when the geopolitical winds shift. India's refusal to compromise on certain demands was a recognition of this fact, an understanding that freedom to decide is the most valuable asset a nation can hold, and it is worth more than any immediate trade package. Philosophically, this is about agency. To be sovereign is to be the author of your own path. even if it means taking the harder road. To accept terms that undermine that agency is to live in someone else's narrative, no matter how favorable the short-term plotline may appear. An agency, once surrendered, rarely returns without a fight. India's stand sends a message not just to its counterpart in the negotiations, but to every other nation watching. We will trade, we will partner, we will engage with the world, but we will do it on terms that do not dilute our right to choose our own future. And perhaps that is the most important takeaway for all of us, whether as nations or individuals. If you do not defend your sovereignty, someone else will decide your destiny for you. Negotiations are never just about numbers on a page. They are about psychology, the side that holds its ground project strength, and strength shapes outcomes long after the meeting room empties. In the trade talks, India's decision to stand firm was as much about managing perception as it was about protecting policy. Every word spoken, every refusal to concede, every measured pause sent a signal, not just to the other side of the table, but to the watching world, that India would not bend simply because pressure was applied. In high-stakes diplomacy, perception becomes currency. If your counterpart believes you are easily swayed, they will design their entire approach around exploiting that weakness. Conversely, if they learn that your position is not moved by intimidation or urgency, they begin to calculate differently. India's posture was not about theatrics or stubbornness. It was about shaping a narrative of resilience. That narrative has a long half-life. It influences not only this negotiation, but every future one, because once a reputation for firmness is established, it becomes part of your strategic capital. The psychology here runs deep. Pressure works on most because it triggers our primal discomfort with conflict and uncertainty. The human impulse is to end tension as quickly as possible, even at the cost of compromise. But those who can endure the discomfort, who can sit in the heat without rushing toward relief, gain the upper hand. India's negotiators demonstrated that kind of endurance. They understood that the appearance of resolve is not a superficial tactic, it is a test of credibility. Fail that test once, and every counterpart from that day forward will know where to push. This is also a lesson in self-image. A nation, like an individual, becomes what it repeatedly demonstrates. If you practice yielding, you become identified with yielding. If you practice holding the line, you become identified with strength. An identity, once cemented, is far harder to challenge. By holding its position, India was reinforcing an identity to itself, to its people, and to the global community as a country that will not accept terms inconsistent with its long-term interest, no matter how intense the pressure of the moment. Philosophically, this is about the alignment between inner conviction and outward action. A position held without inner belief quickly crumbles under scrutiny. But when action flows from deeply held principles, it carries an authenticity that others can sense. That authenticity can unsettle even the most skilled negotiators on the opposite side because they recognize they are dealing with conviction, not calculation. In the end, India's firmness was more than a defensive move, it was an act of self-definition. It showed that true strength is not in how loudly you speak, but in how consistently you stand. And the message it leaves for all of us is this: if you want to be treated with respect, you must first show that you cannot be moved by anything less than what you truly believe in. In every major negotiation, there comes a moment when the offers on the table seem almost irresistible. Market access, reduced tariffs, preferential treatment, all wrapped in the language of opportunity. It's tempting to see these as pure gains, but the wise negotiator asks a harder question: what am I giving up in return, and how will that trade-off shape my future? This is where India's position in the recent talks stands out. It was not about rejecting opportunity, but about weighing it against the invisible costs that might only reveal themselves years down the line. Economic agreements are not snapshots. They are commitments that unfold over decades. What seems like a beneficial clause today can, under different circumstances, become a constraint tomorrow. India recognized that a surge of short-term benefits, cheaper imports, easier market access abroad, favorable headlines, could come at the expense of industries still maturing, sectors that form the backbone of its economic security. The question was not, can we get more trade? But, can we do so without eroding the foundations we are trying to build? This is where long-term thinking requires discipline. Immediate gains have a gravitational pull. They satisfy public opinion, they please markets, they create the illusion of momentum. But national strategy cannot be built on momentum alone. It must rest on stability, resilience, and the capacity to adapt when global tides turn. India's decision to hold back was an acknowledgement that the health of agriculture, manufacturing, and strategic industries cannot be measured only in this quarter's trade figures. These are the assets that protect a nation's independence in the face of economic shocks, geopolitical tensions, or future bargaining. There's also a philosophical dimension to this caution. True freedom is not simply the absence of constraints, it is the ability to make decisions from a position of strength. That strength comes from self-reliance in critical sectors, food security, energy independence, technological capacity. Sacrificing these for the sake of a quick agreement is like selling the roof over your head because the weather is nice today. The rain will come eventually, and you will wish you had kept your shelter. India's choice illustrates that opportunity must be evaluated in context. A deal that looks generous in the short term may carry obligations that limit your room to maneuver later. And once you are locked into an arrangement that favors the other side's strengths over your own, reversing course becomes far harder than resisting in the first place. The lesson here is one of patience and proportion. Trade should be a path to empowerment, not dependency. The real measure of a good deal is not how it looks on signing day, but how it serves you 10, 20, even 50 years into the future. And so the takeaway is simple yet profound. Never let the lure of immediate gain blind you to the cost it may impose on your tomorrow, because it is the tomorrow you protect today that determines the freedom you will have to shape your destiny. In international negotiations, every decision carries a ripple effect, and one of the most overlooked but dangerous consequences of yielding under pressure is the precedent it sets. The moment a nation concedes too easily, it teaches others how to negotiate with it. This is not speculation. It is a well-documented reality of diplomacy. Patterns become reputations, and reputations become leverage, but not the kind you want in your opponent's hands. India understood this truth deeply in the recent trade talks. The issue was not only the deal in front of them, but the template that would be created for every deal that followed. A concession given today rarely stays in isolation. In the complex world of global trade, other nations are always watching, noting where the red lines truly are and where they can be bent. If a country yields once to artificial deadlines or excessive demands, it silently announces to the international community, "This is the point where we break." The next negotiator who sits across from you will remember, and they will use that memory like a key to open the same door, perhaps pushing it even wider. This is why precedent carries such weight. It is not merely about policy, it is about predictability. A nation that behaves predictably under pressure becomes easier to outmaneuver. India's resistance, therefore, was not stubbornness for its own sake, but a deliberate act to ensure that no such predictable weakness could be established. By refusing to concede, India was protecting not just the terms of one agreement, but the strength of its bargaining position in every negotiation that lies ahead. The psychology here is straightforward: human beings, and by extension, governments, test boundaries. If you find that a boundary gives way under minimal pressure, you no longer treat it as fixed. Over time, the entire concept of that boundary erodes. In trade, those boundaries are your policies, your tariffs, your market safeguards, your strategic red lines. Let them slip once, and you will be expected to let them slip again. There's also a philosophical principle at work. The integrity of a nation's position is not measured only by its ability to secure favorable terms in the present, but by its ability to defend the very standards by which it negotiates. That integrity must be guarded jealously, because once compromised, it cannot be restored simply by declaring a tougher stance next time. Strength is cumulative, but so is weakness. India's decision was, in many ways, an investment in its own credibility. It was a reminder that every deal is part of a larger story, and that the choices made in one chapter shape the tone of all the chapters to come. And that is the lesson for all of us. In diplomacy, in business, even in personal life, the standards you uphold today are the boundaries others will respect tomorrow. Defend them well, because once the world learns the price at which you will yield, it will never again offer you more.